Hey everyone, this week is going to be updates. So, as I had said before, when it comes to solar power in the winter, because we've got less sun, we have to have more panel. And again, the flip side happens in the summer. Now we've got more panel than we need. We'll end up generating more power than we probably can use unless we've got ways of utilizing that power during the summer different than we have in the winter, which would be different types of hookups and things like that. But again, I have 6 100-watt panels hooked up in series. Right? I've had some big days where I've been getting over 500 watts of power coming in, and I've had other days where I've gotten 30 watts of power coming in. It depends on how much cloud cover there is, of course, and it depends on how much light we've got during the day. So to give you an idea for February so far, for the week of February 2nd to February 8th, the panels generated 3.31 kilowatts of power. These are going into a unit that is a 12 kilowatt unit. Now, one thing to keep in mind is these numbers that I'm quoting, if the unit tops off at 90%, which it didn't over these 2 weeks, but I increased the amount of power that was sitting in reserve because we had a storm coming through. So these are a little lower than what they would have been. If the panels are generating power, but the unit doesn't need them, I don't have numbers for that. February 9th through the 15th, it was 2.31 kilowatts, but I haven't had to top it off this week. And 16th through the 22nd, and I'm recording this on the 22nd, so obviously we don't have any real numbers for today. So the 16th through the 21st, 4.18 kilowatts of power. The biggest day so far has been Wednesday. It generated 1.59 kilowatts of power on Wednesday for the amount of time that we actually had sun. And that's where the issue comes in, of course, is how much sun do you have during the day? For me, my high point was at 10 o'clock. Then I got a little shadow cast across it at 11, so I dropped down to 132 kilowatts, or 132 watts. And then I went back up to 242 and finished up the day at 371 watts at 1 o'clock, and that was it for me. So the actual power generation was between 9 and 1. All right. It's only 4 hours worth of power, 324 watts at 9 and 500 watts. So for an hour at 10 o'clock, I got 500 watts out of the 600 watts panel. So that's exactly what you want to see, is close to the panels as possible, close to their max. If I had another set of 6 panels and kept that number, then that would have been a kilowatt that I got in the 1 hour period. So with a 12 kilowatt unit, the more power coming in, the faster it recharges, obviously. If I've only got a kilowatt a day coming in, then it takes 12 days to top off the unit, right? Well, it's going to 90%, so not quite 12 days. But we've got that length of time it takes to refill the unit, and it depends on how much time you need it. Now, 12 kilowatts for me, full load on the house is over 20, so 12 kilowatt, if it were trying to power the house, wouldn't last a day. If the power were out for a couple of days and I cut back to just the essentials that I need, I'm not 100% sure, because the house has some old old heating units in it. And the blowers on that for the forced air heat are going to be the biggest drain on the system. It's a propane system, so the spark of the ignition is not going to make a difference. The tape that handles the heating, I can run that off a small unit for about a day, and that heats the pipes coming in to make sure that the pipes don't freeze, because I have well water. The well pump is another X factor, because it is so old that it doesn't have a lot of numbers around it, just like the heater. A lot of stuff today, you've got all those numbers to how much power they're going to generate or how much power they're going to drain. I don't have those on these old pieces of equipment, so I'm not sure how long that would last. I can only go by what the full house utilization is, and like I said, it's over 20 kilowatts. So the unit can be expanded, it can run the whole house, etc. That's an aside. How long is it going to take to stock that unit back up again? And if it was doing a kilowatt a day, it would take 12 days. So if I needed to drain the unit, and let's say I had a unit big enough to run the house for a day, so let's say 24 kilowatts just to make it easy, which would be 2 more batteries. All right, so another 5K or something like that for the batteries. So now I have a 24 kilowatt unit system. If I'm pulling in a kilowatt a day, that's going to take a month to make up for the fact that the unit was used for a full day. Bearing in mind, it can pull from the grid. So it would balance itself out by pulling power from the grid as soon as it could to bring those batteries back up to whatever the base level that I was. You don't want your unit to discharge all the way. Mine cut off at 30%. So even at a 24 kilowatt unit, I'm not going to be having 24 kilowatts worth of power that can be used. It'll cut off at 30% above that. So keeping that in mind, when you put your panels together, you want the panels to be able to recharge the system. And it's not the type of thing where, oh, well, summer's going to come and I can just pop that right up. You can. When the summer comes, that unit will get charged in a day, probably, based off of what I was getting last year. I should be able to get 600 watts from somewhere around 8, 9 o'clock in the morning till 5 o'clock in the afternoon, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So with that amount of power coming in at 600 watts from, let's say, 8 to 3, right? That's from 0800 to 1500 hours. So it's 7 hours at 600 watts. It's 4,200 watts. So over 4 kilowatts of power will come into the system in a day. That's pretty impressive. I double the system. Let's say I put another 6 panels on there. So now I'm at 8 kilowatts in a day. The battery was at 70%, so it only needed less than 6 kilowatts. So what happens to the other 2 kilowatts? So that's the trade-off that you work on in the summer, is having more power coming in than you can use as far as refreshing your batteries is concerned. The other update for this week is I picked up a Creality K2 combo, basically because it was on sale. And with all the tariffs and BS coming out of the government at this point, I wanted to grab what I could now. It comes with a 4-color unit. It's different than the Ender in that the Ender has, they call it a bed thrower. The bed on the Ender slides back and forth. The head is fixed, right? So the head moves up and down and left and right, and that's it. The bed moves forward and back. With the new unit, the bed moves down, moves up and down, and the head moves on the left and right and front and back. So it's a little bit different. It requires less space because it's all self-contained in its box. When it changes its colors, it makes a little poop that spits out the back with the different colors, which I forgot about, and now I have to figure out how I'm going to clean that up. But anyway, it did an 8-hour job for me last night. I am making a feeder for my birds that sit on the ground. For those of you who know or who watch birds, there are 2 sets of birds. There's ground feeders and there's the bird feeder type. And it's a mixed bag as far as sizes are concerned, although the feeders that I use the big birds don't really work with very well. The feeders that I've got are more small bird oriented. So that means that the bigger birds, cardinals usually feed off the ground anyway, but a lot of the little birds as well want to eat off the ground. And the problem with that is if it's on the ground, it can get in the snow and it makes it a little bit more easy for cats to get to them. So my design so far is a hybrid. I bought a plastic milk crate. All right, that's going to be my base. I'm going to flip that over so that the bottom part of the milk crate is the top of it. So the opening will be at the ground. That'll allow me to hook it down with tent pegs come nice weather so that I can make sure that it doesn't blow away. On the top of that, I'm going to use a Gridfinity grid, a 7x7 grid. That's what took over the 8 hours to print last night, which has screw holes in it and magnetic openings in it. I'm going to screw it directly to the milk crate so that it won't come off the milk crate. Then I'm going to put magnets in place, and I've got a 7x7 bin that's going to go on top of that with just an inch wall. So I'm not going to go too big on the first one. I just want to get a feel for how this works and how much seed it takes, because it is a 300 by 300 grid, which fits perfectly on the interlocking part of these bins. So the bins are stackable, and there's a centerpiece to it that allows it to drop into the other one. This will actually allow me to even stack the thing after I put the grid on it. But once the grid's in place and I've built the bin, then the bin will get some magnets on it, the grid will get some magnets on it, and that's just to keep the wind from easily popping that off or a bird landing on it and flipping it up. And then we'll add some seed to it and we'll see how the birds go with it. It should give them enough purchase that they can grab onto the side and eat there, or they can just hop onto it and eat like they would if they were on the ground. Hopefully it's a big enough area for them and they're happy with it. We'll have to see. I might have gone too big with it, in which case I might have to make a platform around it perhaps and just keep a bin in the middle. So I'll play with the design a bit, but that's what I got going on with the 3D printer for the design. I'll let you know what I think of the K2. So far, it was relatively easy to set up. It is a heavy beast, and I'm short. So lifting it up onto the table that I've got it on was an interesting challenge. But with the single CFS, the filament system, on top of the unit, I have to get on a stool in order to get up to it. I'm short, all right? I'm 5'5". So the way I've got it set up is a little tricky for me to utilize. It's been working beautifully. It did an absolute great job with the single color 7x7 base plate that I made yesterday. Again, relatively easy to set up. When it changes colors, there is a little bit of extrusion that it poops out the back. So you have to keep that in mind. I need to make a little bin, I think, in the back so I can capture the stuff. And I'm sure one of these places already made it, and it's probably an M3 screw or something. I'll just pop a couple of those in there, and I'll have something on the back to catch this stuff. Feeding this is the simplest thing I have ever seen. Once you've got it assembled, each of the colors have RFID tags on them. So you literally just take the device and put it, or take your color and put it in the CFS. You can have 4 CFSs on here. So you can have 16 different colors. But once you put the color, or the spool in the CFS, you just feed it forward into the tube. When it's on, it just sees, oh, I've got something, and pulls it in, and you're done. It's much easier to load than the Ender was. They have a new one coming out that's kind of a hybrid between the Ender. It's like an Ender with a CFS that comes with it. That looks fascinating to me, and it looks very easy to use, and it's under $400 or under $500. So it's an inexpensive way to get into it if you want to. I highly recommend it from the perspective that it's a lot easier to load than the Ender 3. I love my Ender 3, don't get me wrong. But there's some days it can be a little frustrating trying to hand feed the spool through. I have a heat unit that I use with it. All right. So it heats and dries the spool. So I'll turn that on, let that do its thing for a bit to dry the stuff out. But from there, it has to go through a tube, which goes up through another piece, which is, to me, it's a design flaw, and I'll explain why in a minute. And from there, it goes up another tube, and then you have to feed it down into the head. The first piece that you're feeding it through is a sensor. So it knows that there's filament going to the head. The problem with it is I have had a situation where the tube, right, you've got this Teflon tube. It's a plastic tube that goes from the heating unit to that first sensor, where it's actually, for some reason, gotten pulled into the main unit, so into the heater itself. And when it does that and starts to spool that in, it then can't feed the filament because now it's running cross purposes to itself. It's trying to pull, but it can't because the tube is now wrapped around the base. When that happens, the sensor thinks that there's filament because nothing's changed, but the head runs out of filament because it's used up what it had and its wheels can't pull anymore. So to me, and I understand why from a design standpoint, you've got the head, there's a lot of heat to that head. Maybe putting the sensor there could be a little bit tricky, but having a sensor in the head, which I think they now do, would have allowed it to know that there's a problem in the feed. The camera will let it know that there's a problem with the print, but it wasn't paying attention to the fact that the tube had gone in. Right? And I'm not sure what caused that the first time, but once it did it, now it just wants to do it all the time. I've got to put a little cap on the top so it doesn't allow it to go in. The reason it can go in is at the top of the heating unit is a little rubber gasket that you can seal, right? So you could leave this thing on all the time and just have a series of these waiting and just put your tube to it and pull the stuff out when you need it. But it's running through that gasket. The tube is slippery so that the filament doesn't have any binding, but it's slippery on both sides. So that makes it just as easy to pop past that gasket and go into the unit. Other than that, it's the only problem I've had with the Ender unit. And again, the Ender was originally designed to just have a spool on the side. So this is a kind of a hybrid setup that I've got. I like my setup. I just got to add a couple things to it. But next week, I'll do a little bit more in depth on both of the 3D printers, what I've been using them for, and some of the design stuff that I see. And that's what I got for you guys for next week. Thank you very much for listening.